In early June this year, Latheefa Koya was appointed as the chairperson of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, resulting in mixed reactions from everyone, but mostly the opposition came from members of the government of the day. What concerns this interview is on her replacement at Lawyers for Liberty. Right now, joining me is Melissa Sasidaran, the activist as well as lawyer. She has been appointed as the director of LFL, or Lawyers for Liberty, replacing Latheefa Koya. Melissa, thanks very much for joining us. I guess people would know you more, not just from your work, which is as important as it is that we can speak of today, but more of the Twitter, I guess, viral that was made from you asking SPR, where is your ballot paper? This is 7th May last year, a day before the elections. How has it been since then?
When the photo went viral, of course, I didn't intend it to be so. It was just another means of advocacy, of telling people that this is happening, because a lot of people, when it comes to overseas voters, they're not aware of what the process is like. So previously, there was voting where it could be done at embassies, but now at the last GE, suddenly the rules were changed and you had to vote by ballot. But the period of time from the announcement of the elections to the actual posting out of the ballot by the Election Commission, it was just too short of a time period. I recall it was about less than a week or so for us to obtain the ballot paper, and we have to post it back. So by hook or by crook, we had to get it back by the election day. So on
of course, these are just the many tactics that was employed by the previous government in terms of circumventing voters, and that is the kind of common knowledge that people go by with. But the reason I brought this up is, of course, other than the fact that it was fun kind of see, your post getting like tens of thousands of retweets, is actually trying to address the symptomatic notions of many of these little things, and addressing the root cause of the problem, which is proper governance at the national level, at the federal level. And this is exactly what LFL stands for right now. What people find it interesting is that LFL, or Lawyers for Liberty, has always been seen as aligned towards PKR, largely because of the members within Lawyers for Liberty. Many of them are members of PKR, if not just card-carrying members. Is this an optics problem for Lawyers for Liberty in terms of trying to pursue what you want to pursue, but being labelled as being pro-PKR or pro-Pakatan?
Well, I think that optics has never been an issue for us, to be honest. Of course, it's raised by some quarters, but generally the public can see that our work has largely been very independent. Whenever there's an abuse of the processes by the government, by the authorities, abuse of the Sedition Act, the Peaceful Assembly Act, we were always there to speak up on it. Of course, it cannot be denied that some of us are members of certain political parties, but I think that's something that is a separate thing from our work as a human rights organization. You can be a member of a political party and a member of a human rights organization, because I think the politics at that time necessitate, especially post-reformasi, it necessitates some people to feel that this is an additional platform that I have to advocate on issues of reform. So, but that aside, we have always been independent when it comes to issues of death in custody, fatal police shooting, our well-known case of Aminul Rashid. We have always been very vocal, regardless of what it is. And I would say
this is the problem, right? Because there are many other things that you guys do in terms of upholding human rights issues, in terms of managing the kind of custody, death. Those kind of work is extremely important. But because your entanglement, not yours, in Lawyers for Liberty's entanglement in politics, doesn't that take away the kind of focus and the kind of value that you bring to the table with your other work? Is politics truly disrupting how LFL runs its business?
Not at all. We have been able to do our work with integrity, and whatever it is, we always go back to what is our fundamental rights as per the Constitution. No one has raised an issue about about PKR links, and in fact, PKR does not control Lawyers for Liberty at all. It has no links, it gives no funds, there's absolutely no connection except for the fact that some might be members of PKR. But also, you have to remember the pre-elections, last year, largely throughout the years leading up to the election, the largest number of people who were arrested or detained under Sedition Act, charged under PAA, they were all, to a large extent, PKR members. Because of the issues that PKR was advocating, they were advocating a lot of reforms and they were very vocal about it. So naturally, a large number of clients we represented at that time were PKR, but it had no link whatsoever to, some being members of PKR whatsoever, because in the discharge of our duties, it's always without fear or favour.
That's a problem, right? Because some of these draconian laws are still in place,
Yes.
including that of the Sedition Act. Is Lawyers for Liberty trying to do more than what you guys do now in terms of highlighting the problems of such draconian laws still being put in place?
Yes, the Sedition Act and the Peaceful Assembly Act and many other oppressive laws such as the National Security Council Act, all these laws were supposed to be repealed immediately upon the Pakatan government coming into power. And we have spoken up about their inability to do so since the elections. We are very clear on this. The Sedition Act, Peaceful Assembly Act, all these laws must go, because even though we are seeing less number of arrests now, in fact there's hardly any arrests or charges under the PAA, there are some under the Sedition Act, especially when it concerns the royalty, but we have spoken up against it as well. But regardless of the policies or the intention of the new Pakatan Harapan government, as long as these legislations are on the table, the authorities, the law enforcers, they are going to utilize it. Whether it's in a form of questioning or arrest, it doesn't matter. It's wrong, and it's a piece of legislation that has to go.
Many people would agree with you
Yes.
then. But the problem here is that the Pakatan government is not listening to anyone, including yourself. Why do you think that the Pakatan government is still keeping the laws in place?
I think the
Sorry, if I may add.
Yes.
With a promise that they would repeal it within the first 100 days. This is their promise,
Yes,
not anyone.
yes.
Not yours, not mine. They said it.
There are many promises made by the Pakatan Harapan government, and we have heard numerous excuses being given. And initially, I think many of us were willing to give a chance to the government to sort their issues out. But it's been a year since then, and I think it's time for the Pakatan Harapan government, we can't even call it a new government now after a year. It's time for them to put their foot down, and the Law Minister VK Liew has said that by the end of this year, the Sedition Act would be tabled for repeal, and we will be holding him to his word.
Why is it that people like you are holding him to his word? Why not the opposition? What's wrong with the opposition right now?
Well, I think
I commend you guys for holding the Minister of Law, true to his word, but you're not elected.
Yes.
We have opposition members who are elected, which are pretty quiet.
That's why we are wondering too, why are the electorate of these elected opposition members, why are they not making a noise about it? Because at the end of the day, as long as these laws are there, they should be worried too. One day, all it takes is one person to decide, okay, we're going to use the Sedition Act again. Because remember, the Sedition Act was actually there was actually a moratorium on it, and it was lifted after the fireman Adib case, and that was really shocking, and we because we expected it to be abolished completely. So I think the opposition members need to sort out their house issues, but they need to be concerned about all these laws too, because it affects them. And I hope that in the next parliamentary sitting or whenever this law is eventually tabled, they would be supporting its abolition, regardless of the stand that was taken by their previous political masters.
Now we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Melissa. Welcome back. You're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. Today I have with me Melissa Sasidaran, the recently appointed, newly minted Director of Lawyers for Liberty, an NGO that advocates, well, I guess, liberty. Melissa, the issues that I see very recently of LFL, say I'm a critic now, right, of LFL, is that you guys are putting out fires more than you guys are addressing structural issues. Be it from recent arrests of people, the violations of human rights of individuals, those kind of things. And while that is important, do you feel that a lot more attention needs to be given in terms of addressing structural, legal framework issues that needs to be changed, you know, to a point where sometimes you would need a 2/3 majority in the parliament? Aren't those issues greater in terms of magnitude that needs to be focused on, other than putting out these little fires that you have to deal with day to day?
Yes, the fires that we have to put out from day to day is inevitable. That needs to be done, especially when there are oppressive laws still being used. But we are also doing a lot of advocacy behind closed doors with the Law Minister and with the Home Ministry in order to resolve a lot of issues such as custodial death, statelessness. But the problem and the challenge for us is, one, when it comes to the public, especially with the government's attempts at ratifying the ICET and the ICC, and there was a U-turn, I think we need to now play a bigger role in terms of advocacy and changing the way we advocate for issues, because the government is unprepared to handle the backlash that happened. So there clearly needs to be better communication, better sharing of information to the public, and I think the ministers or the elected reps now in government, I think they forget that they are now in power. They are no longer an opposition.
So it sounds like they do, right? They just oppose for the sake of opposing.
Yes, exactly. So, for example, like the Parliamentary Select Committee, HUHA recently, I mean, they have been formed since early December last year. And they were largely silent to the point that they have basically rendered themselves irrelevant. And I think this is not a fault of anyone else, but themselves. They have been elected and appointed to positions so that they can oversee and push forth reforms that should be done. So first and foremost, I think they should reflect on what they should have done. Why were reforms to the Parliamentary Select Committee, why were reforms to the Federal Constitution in order to make the MACC an independent commission, for example, why was that all not done? Why was the Sedition Act not repealed? All this, first and foremost, they have to reflect on what they have been doing so far. As I said, it's been a year, so we need answers from them as well.
Do you think that Lawyers for Liberty and all these other NGOs that existed prior to the formation of the new government, you guys are getting cozy with the government to a point where there's not much aggressiveness coming out from you guys in trying to urge the government to do what is important?
Well, I cannot speak for other NGOs, but I can say that for our side, we have definitely been vocal. Recently, I had the case of a death in custody in a Sungai Buloh prison. He died of tuberculosis. And we demanded for answers from the government as to why this happened, because he would have contracted TB for months, and he was there. He was in prison since December. So when he died at the hospital, and he was only brought to the hospital at the very last critical minute, and he died 3 days later. When he was brought to the hospital and we demanded for a post-mortem, the hospital was also not very cooperative initially. So we had to basically do what we have always done, bang tables in order to get answers. And in the end, we got a response. The hospital cooperated with the postmortem, and we got a response from the health ministry saying they will look into it. But we are hoping that a report or an answer, a clear answer from them would come quickly, because this is an issue that has been prevailing for a long time.
This episode that you discussed basically underlines my point that you guys are doing a lot more in terms of human rights, in terms of everything else, but there's slow or sluggish progress that needs to be seen from the political front, from the changing of laws. I know that some laws can't be changed just like that. You would need a two-third constitutional amendment. Things like the splitting of the Attorney General's role with the Prosecutor General's role. I mean, those kind of things, I understand you need two-thirds majority. And you might need, for instance, this government would need to have some support from the opposition or any opposition in order for them to get that majority. But those are structural issues that require two-thirds majority. There are other issues that do not require a two-thirds majority that they are not doing. And wouldn't, Lawyers for Liberty have to be bigger in terms of making noise, banging on tables, as you say yourself, on these issues?
And we have been. More recently, we also had the case of a Malaysian on death row in Singapore. And of course, we are completely against the death penalty. And we had to bang tables as well in order to get the public to listen to the facts of the case. And in that case, we managed to get a stay of execution, but for how long? So we need to continue raising public awareness on this front. And in all the issues that we have advocated, I don't think we have ever rested, or been too comfortable in pushing for issues, because we know that without making noise, and as I mentioned, many of our civil society activists are now in government, and although they are pushing issues in their own way, but publicly we feel that void of making noise and raising public awareness so that the government will respond to it. And thankfully now with the new government, they are a little bit more responsive, whereas previously we had to really push for an answer. Now, I mean, as you can see, a few days ago with the deaths of orang asli, immediately there was a response, because I think they are afraid of, the government is afraid of optics as well. But having a response is not enough. We need solutions to the issues, and we will continue to push for meaningful reforms to our institutions so that we have better rights for all.
Right, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss about Melissa's plans for LFL moving forward. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. Today we have with us Melissa Sasidaran, the newly minted LFL director. Melissa, you've been around for quite a bit. You have been called to the bar in 2010, and you have represented numerous civil society bodies, including that of issues relating to human rights, PAA or the Peaceful Assembly Act, and MCMC Act, an act that is regulating this station as well, for that matter. What would be in store for LFL under your, stewardship?
Well, as for now, there are still many reforms that needs to be done on many fronts. So our existing issues that we have advocated for will continue. We have issues that are very pressing at the moment, including death penalty, custodial deaths, as I mentioned, the case of tuberculosis, and there are many more similar to that. There are inquests that are still going on from cases of police shooting, where this is where we have also pushed for the review of the standard operating procedures of the police and calling for IPCMC for more transparency, because in many of these cases of police shooting, it involves what we think is a wrongful way of using firearms. For example, the angle of shooting. So the inquests are being done. We also have cases of statelessness. That's not resolved as well. Because the Pakatan Harapan government, in their manifesto, they promised a lot of things, right? It was a political candy at that time in preparation for the elections. And among the things that they said in the manifesto was that within 100 days, we're going to resolve statelessness for Indians. But they have not only been unable to fulfill that promise, but why only Indians? We have, statelessness for many other groups, all walks of Malaysians, right? So that's still ongoing. We had 3 major cases that went up all the way to the federal court recently, but they were eventually settled without going through the hearing, and they were granted citizenship. So in the case of Roisa Abdullah, she was granted citizenship after a lot of table banging as well. So, I mean, they are granting citizenship.
You surely don't want to be known as a table banger, right? I mean,
exactly, and we want to help the government resolve these issues, because these are serious human rights issues that need to be addressed.
Do you think the law minister is cooperative?
I think
or his colleagues?
Well, that's the thing. I think he needs support from his colleagues, because we surely the law minister has been supportive vocally, publicly on a lot of issues, but I fear that he may not be getting the support that is needed.
If you truly are independent in terms of your capacity as the director of LFL, then you wouldn't mind me saying that if this government continues its path of being uncooperative or unrelenting in terms of not changing the laws, is it fair for Malaysians to change government in 4 years' time?
I would say that we should vote based on how we think the government has performed. I can't say how you would vote, whichever way you vote, however you choose. It depends on your own personal considerations. But I think even for myself, it would be difficult to voice support for a government that can't seem to get its act together.
After 5 years, for instance?
Yes, after 5 years, for instance. Now 1 year has passed. It's been 1.5 years. We don't have much time left, and then there will be a change of Prime Minister. We don't know what's going to happen with that either. How committed is he to the reform agenda? I think we're not sure about that yet, because even with the current government, there's been a lot of uncertainty as to settling in, or so they say. And there will be a lot more uncertainty, and before you know it, it will be the next elections. But the reforms need to be done immediately.
And you know what's interesting? Malaysians are getting a little bit savvy in terms of changing their governments.
We have done it once, and we could do it again.
And peacefully at that.
Yes.
So do you think that this government is running at risk of losing the people's support as it stands right now?
In the long term, if nothing meaningful has been done, then I fear that it is at that risk.
Reflecting back on LFL, it seems that you have a lot of things that needs to be done. Does this reflect poorly on your predecessors, like Latheefa or Eric Paulson or many other directors before you?
Not at all, because we just had a change of government last year, and under the previous government, we were unable to do anything. In fact, just to demonstrate the level of difficulty that we have, not to mention all the arrests that were happening, all the mass dragnet that was happening, where we had to stake out at the courts, we stake out at the police station regardless of the time of the day. Just to demonstrate Maria Chin's SOSMA case, when she was arrested under SOSMA, we immediately, the lawyers got together and we prepared the necessary court documentation in order to file for habeas corpus, and we stayed up until early hours in the morning, and I went back with the briefcase of documents, and I had to bring it up to my home, because I couldn't run the risk of having something happen to it. Because at that time it was an intense political period. Everyone was being watched to some extent. And just days before, my colleague, one of my colleagues had his car broken into, and all that was taken was his legal briefcase. Thankfully nothing major was taken, but we just couldn't run that risk with Maria Chin. So it was a very oppressive, unrelenting government that was not open at all to any talks of whether it's human rights reforms. They're not open to it at all. Whereas now we are seeing a lot more openness when it comes to accepting these concepts. So, I mean, we certainly hope for the best, and we want to support the government in their reform agenda. But if they are not helping themselves, then we have no choice but to continue pushing for it publicly.
At what level, and towards the end of the interview right now, but at what level of patience do you have? You put a timeline to it? Are you putting cooperation levels on it? At what point would be the breaking point for you guys?
I think for now, I mean, of course there is you have to take into account the context of it. But for now, since we have seen, you know, a year and a half in power, I think definitely our patience are being tested. And as I said, we don't have much time left before there is a new elections. So definitely we want to see some concrete action being done to institutional amendments so that all these issues can be resolved soon.
All right, thanks Melissa. That was Melissa Sasidaran, the Director of Lawyers for Liberty. If you've missed any part of this interview, or if you want to watch more of interviews such as this, just head on to astro.com and search for Notepad. Until then, thank you very much and goodbye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.